Hi, everybody. So Dia says, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm just coming back for more and more in-depth depth. Hi, Dolores. How are you? Hey, Steve Gonzo. Hey, what's that a link to? And Dia says, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just keep coming back for more and more in-depth depth. Evelina says, hi there. And Steve Gonzo says, make a toast tonight at 9:21. It will be the 21st minute of the 21st hour, the 21st day of the 21st year, the 21st century. Yes, but it will also be the 21st second of the 21st minute of the 21st hour or the 21st day. Yeah, what happened to the second? Huh? What happened to the second? I don't know. Anyway, thank you for coming. Please share. Let's try to get as many people here as we can. I know that there's a movement for a People's Party call going on right now. God knows what else is going on. Who knows? A lot of things seem to be going on these days. I put up 3 not so short takes today. I think the shortest one was 19 minutes. But what they were about was the first 2 were about paying for a Green New Deal. And the third one was about Joe Biden developing the healthcare part of his plan by essentially giving it to lobbyists to write. So we got the usual suspects, okay, among the lobbyists who successfully torpedoed both Medicare for All and the public option in 2009. And he gave them the bill to write. I suppose he figured if they wrote it, they wouldn't make any effort to torpedo it. Don't be too sure. Don't be too sure about that, Joe. But anyway, the pretty corrupt activities are detailed in the third of the 3 short takes today. So you might want to take a look at those. And Thea Swift said, just let me get it off my chest. A elitist gather full of pomp and circumstance. I was most smitten by the senator in mittens graciously resting his hands. Yeah, Bernie got all over the place with that one. Between the mittens and his one and only coat that everybody is getting on him for because it was a gift from his son who spent $600 or $700 on it. And, oh, my son can't spend $600 or $700 on my birthday. Anyway, there was a little something there. Well, anyway, things are exploding all over, so let's get into some of the things that are exploding all over. And we'll see what they are, and I will comment on them and try to weave the whole thing together. Kay Diaz says, almost got the rhythm and rhyme right. And Kay says, wow, I was able to share. Good sign. Yeah, that is a good sign. Good sign for me, too. Okay. So, let's get the first of these in gear. So Biden did something which was the least he could have done. This was detailed in an article by Jake Johnson today at Common Dreams. Now let's cancel them, quote unquote, demands AOC as Biden extends pause on student loan payments. And that is the nub of the story right there in the headline. How convenient of them to give us that. And there is AOC late Wednesday calling on Joe Biden to use his executive authority to immediately cancel student loan payments after the president signed an order extending an existing pause through at least the end of September. Anyway, she tweeted, okay, now let's cancel them. In response to his order, which directs the Education Department to freeze federal student loan payments and collections and keep the interest rate at 0%. Too many Americans are struggling to pay for basic necessities and to provide for their families, the White House said in a statement. And quote again, they should not be forced to choose between paying their student loans and putting food on the table, unquote. Well, Captain Obvious. I'm glad Captain Obvious was Captain Obvious this time. While the extension of the payment freeze was a welcome day one action by Biden, the progressives have long argued the president has a legal authority and a moral obligation to unilaterally cancel the student loan debt that is saddling tens of millions of Americans. And the debt collective says Biden can cancel all $1.7 trillion of student debt by executive order. And they are right. Biden claimed it is questionable, quote unquote, whether the president can legally cancel student loan debt via executive order, and said he is, quote, unlikely to do that, unquote. Instead of taking executive action, Biden has proposed canceling $10,000 in federal student debt per borrower through legislation. Well, why through legislation? Well, since he said it's questionable whether the president can legally cancel student loan debt by executive order, obviously it's questionable whether he can cancel 10,000 of it by executive order. So instead, he's trying to cancel the whole thing, but is trying to cancel 10,000 through legislation. So the question which immediately arises, well, if you can cancel 10,000 through legislation, why not try to cancel it all through legislation? What's wrong with that? But anyway, of course, he's wrong. He's wrong about that. It isn't questionable, as Alexis Goldstein, a senior policy analyst with Americans for Financial Reform, said, quote, it simply isn't correct to say the legal authority to cancel student debt via executive action is questionable, quote unquote. And quote again, the authority is clear, documented, and even the Trump administration used executive authority to cancel student loan interest payments twice, unquote, Goldstein noted. So obviously, if the authority is there to cancel student loan interest payments twice, then the authority is there to cancel student loan interest payments all the time, continuously, and to cancel also the necessity for repayment. Just ahead of Biden's inauguration Wednesday, the Debt Collective Union launched the Biden Jubilee 100, which is an initiative that consists of 100 student debt strikers refusing to pay back their student loans until President Biden cancels all student debt, which he has the power to do immediately. And they say our communities are struggling in the midst of the COVID pandemic, reads their website. And there are millions of us facing eviction and food insecurity while suffering from exploding medical costs, rising tuition, unpayable bills, and the perpetual fear of illness. Joe Biden and his administration need to act immediately, and we're going to make him do it, unquote. And I don't know if they're going to make him do it or not, but I do know they're right. He needs to be canceling that debt. It's the easiest thing to do. It's politically stupid not to do it. Politically stupid. It's morally wrong not to do it, but it's politically stupid not to do it. If he does it, he benefits millions of people. Those millions of people aren't going to forget. He benefits them, many, many of them, very big time amounts. If he forgives student debt, he's got a solid block of voters right there, probably for the rest of his time in office. Joe, stupid Joe, time to act. Next, we got a piece from Kenny Stansel of Common Dreams. And what does Kenny say? Smartest thing we can do is act big, quote unquote. Yellen bolsters demand for Biden to enact bold FDR-style agenda on January 19th. That's actually pretty significant because that was at her confirmation hearing on Tuesday. Treasury Secretary nominee Janet Yellen endorsed the progressives' demand for President-elect Joe Biden to pursue a bold and egalitarian relief, recovery, and reform program capable of tackling the intertwined public health and economic catastrophe triggered by the coronavirus pandemic. Right now, with his interest rates at historic lows, the smartest thing we can do is act big, said Yellen, an economist and former chair of the Federal Reserve between 2014 and 2018. Of course, we know that interest rates being at historic lows are irrelevant because whatever the rates are, the federal government can pay the interest anyway. It can always pay the interest. But also, why issue debt instruments? In order to act in a big way. Why not just use the $1 trillion coin or overt congressional financing to directly create the reserves in the Treasury spending account? Why not? It's effortlessly done. Now, Yellen might not know how to do it, but I'll be happy to teach her. And so will Stephanie Kelton. And so will dozens of other MMT people who know very well how to do it. Quote, in the long run, I believe the benefits will far outweigh the costs, she says, especially if we care about helping people who have been struggling for a very long time. And even more so because the benefits don't have to have any cost. They don't have to have, they can have zero cost. So why wouldn't we do it? Why won't we act big? She says, quote, economists don't always agree, but I think there is a consensus now. Without further action, we risk a longer, more painful recession now and longer-term scarring of the economy later, unquote, she added. People worry about a K-shaped recovery, but well before COVID-19 infected a single American, we were living in a K-shaped economy, one where wealth built upon wealth, while working families fell further and further behind. And Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, backed the Treasury Secretary nominee's call for the incoming Biden administration to disregard fear-mongering about the national debt in order to focus on improving the well-being of struggling working-class households that are grappling with unemployment, hunger, housing insecurity, and other pressing problems. The crises that face us are enormous, and we need solutions that match the scale of these crises, Jayapal said, adding that the CPC will support Yellen's efforts to invest in the American people. And she tweeted that, and it was also covered in the New York Times. Yellen was given a glowing review by Senator Ron Wyden, who will soon chair the Senate Finance Committee once Democrats assume control of the chamber. So Wyden is chairing the Finance Committee, Bernie is chairing the Budget Committee, and Bernie and Wyden talk to each other. Isn't that really good? Quote, this is the worst economic crisis in 100 years, unquote, said Wyden, and nobody is better qualified to lead an economic recovery. Actually, there are people who are more well qualified to lead a recovery. Stephanie Kelton is one of them. She is certainly one of them. She's probably the most qualified person to lead an economic. And the reason why she is because not only does she know the real facts about the financing very well and the real theory behind it very well, but she also knows a good deal about the politics behind it right now, okay, as well. And she really knows how the Fed and the Treasury both work. I know Yellen knows how the Fed works. I don't know if she knows how the Treasury works. In addition to helping to design and manage the Biden administration's response to current hardships felt by large swaths of the U.S. population, particularly low-income individuals living in resource-deprived communities, a category in which workers of color are overrepresented. Janet Yellen will also influence the federal government's approach to financial regulation and taxation. As Wyden explained during Yellen's hearing, such decisions shape other arenas, including energy policy. Despite Biden's extensive record of pushing for bipartisan but neoliberalism, there are multiple progressive commentators who've pointed to the devastating effects of the coronavirus crisis, the climate emergency, worsening inequality, and a weakened democracy. I've pointed to all those things in an attempt to persuade the president-elect to rebuild the economy on a more just and sustainable basis, especially now that Democrats control both chambers of commerce, in addition to the White House. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention they control both chambers of Congress by the thinnest of margins, which is another good reason to rebuild the economy on a more just and sustainable basis. Because if the president-elect can do that, then in 2022, he will get bigger margins in the House and bigger margins in the Senate. In the face of cynical calls for national harmony from the insurrectionist GOP, that is so true. The Nation's John Nichols is among those urging Biden to enact a visionary agenda reminiscent of former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, a robust federal response to the Great Depression that ushered in an era of more fairly shared prosperity through stronger regulations and the public provision of jobs, infrastructure, and services. And there's a quote from John Nichols in here, which I am not going to read. There is the last paragraph. It says, while the poetic appeal for amity would undoubtedly get high marks from newspaper editorial pages and a nod from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, it won't be enough to rally the great mass of Americans to take up the necessary burden of forging transformative change. And truer words were never spoken than those written. Rather than making lukewarm appeals to unity with anti-democratic Republicans, Nichols wrote, Biden must channel Roosevelt, who also inherited an unprecedented crisis and responded not by, quote, compromising with those who defended the old order, unquote, but by altering the purpose of government, turning it into a tool for empowering labor and achieving downward redistribution. Pleading with Biden to not govern from the center, former Labor Secretary Robert Reich wrote earlier this week that, quote, most of today's GOP live in a parallel universe. There is no center between the reality-based world and theirs, said Reich, noting that last Wednesday, fully 95% of House Republicans voted against impeaching Trump for inciting insurrection, even after his attempted coup threatened their very lives. How craven do you have to be to vote against impeaching somebody who threatened your very lives? How much of a coward do you have to be to roll over and then vote against impeaching them? That is just incredible. That statistic is just incredible. It's true, but it's incredible. Anyway, skipping ahead. As Nichols put it, FDR knew the country needed more than healing. Instead of feel-good talk of unification, FDR called out the world's speculators, the bankers, and their conservative apologists. As it was in 1932, now is the time for a, quote, call to action, unquote, wrote Nichols. That is, now is the time for a rendezvous with destiny, if I can recall that old line. And he urged Biden to, quote, outline a bold agenda for addressing a pandemic, mass unemployment, the climate crisis, systemic racism, and the broken priorities of a federal government that consistently overfunds the military-industrial complex and underfunds the human needs of a society overwhelmed by hunger and homelessness, unquote. And looking ahead to Biden's inauguration, Jayapal tweeted, quote, let's immediately get to work on a bold, progressive agenda to get us through this crisis, fight injustice, and lift everyone up. And this is the same Jayapal who voted along with all of the other progressives to refrain from blocking Nancy Pelosi for the speakership, because, of course, Nancy Pelosi is going to get to work on a bold, progressive agenda to get us through this crisis, to fight injustice, and to lift everyone up, right? I don't think so. But good words by Jayapal. We'll have some more good words that I won't have time to go over tonight, but probably on Saturday. And next, we have Rashida doing something good. And Rashida Tlaib on January 20th, 2021. Warning against further erosion of civil liberties, Tlaib leads charge against new domestic terrorism laws. This one is by Kenny Stansel. And there's a picture. There's Rashida wearing a protective mask, working through the Cannon Tunnel to the U.S. Capitol on January 12th, 2021 in Washington, D.C. On Tuesday, she sent a letter to House and Senate leaders in which she and 9 colleagues argued against expanding the national security state and further curtailing civil liberties in the aftermath of the deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol by a pro-Trump mob. The Trump mob's, quote, the Trump mob's success in breaching the Capitol was not due to lack of resources at the disposal of federal law enforcement, and in this moment we must resist the erosion of our civil liberties and constitutional freedoms, however well-intentioned proposed security reforms may be, the lawmakers wrote in the letter, which was endorsed by Demand Progress, Free Press, Women Without War, and the Council on American Islamic Relations. Quote, we firmly believe that the national security and surveillance powers of the U.S. government are already too broad, undefined, and unaccountable to the people, unquote. She added, and 9 additional Democratic representatives, specifically Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, Jamal Bowman of New York, also Pramila Jayapal of Washington, Mondaire Jones of New York, there's Mondaire standing with the squad, Ro Khanna of California, Barbara Lee of California, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, and Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. Where's Marie Newman? I don't see Marie Newman there. I'm pining away for Marie Newman to be in that number. Quote, to further degrade those rights and liberties. Oh, by the way, where's Cori Bush? She should be on that too. To further degrade those rights and liberties in reaction to this attack, they wrote, quote again, would undermine our democracy at a time when we must join together to defend it with all our collective might. And there is Congresswoman Tlaib's tweet to the House, and her letter is attached. The co-signers, their signatures are attached also to the letter. It's available at the article, which I've linked to. Several initiatives throughout the nation's history was quote, sold as being necessary to fight extremism, but quickly devolved into tools used for the mass violation of the human and civil rights of the American people, unquote. The 10 legislators asserted, including the House Un-American Activities Committee, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Counterintelligence Program, COINTELPRO, the USA Patriot Act, and the FBI's anti-Black Lives Matter Operation Iron Fist. Quote, while many may find comfort in increased national security powers in the wake of this attack, we must emphasize we have been here before and we have seen where that road leads, unquote, they wrote. And they're right, of course. I'm glad to see them out there with this. It's very, very important. Extending the powers of the federal government in this respect, to quote also from the letter, would only serve to further undermine our democracy, not to protect it. And they're absolutely right on that. Omar last week denounced crisis-driven attempts to weaken civil liberties and create, quote, a broader security structure or a deeper police state, which is the last thing we need, especially since so many of the police in the police state are evidently in league with the fascists outside the government, characterizing such measures as anti-democratic. Tlaib and other lawmakers who signed a letter said, while it's clear this attack is one of the biggest intelligence failures in recent history, this does not mean that our government needs more national security or surveillance powers. Instead, the lawmakers said Congress should pursue the following objectives in its response to the invasion of the Capitol. Fully investigate the violent January 6, 2021 attack in a nonpartisan, transparent manner. Commit to releasing all fundings from any investigations into the attack to the public. But three is to recognize white nationalist and QAnon groups as a national security threat that they are. Take action to combat them through existing laws, powers, powers and regulations, which are more than sufficient to meet this threat. Recognize the threat posed by these groups hasn't already been adequately addressed is because of a deeply ingrained unwillingness and or hesitancy to act against this group within all three branches of government, and especially in the law enforcement community, including the Department of Justice, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and the intelligence agencies, and is not the result of insufficient domestic national security and or surveillance powers. Quote, in the face of great tragedy, we must reject reactionary demands to further erode the rights and liberties of the American people, unquote, Tlaib said. And that does that particular article. I mean, I couldn't agree more with it. Obviously, the danger is giving any more authority. What we need to do is make these folks enforce the law that they have been hired to enforce. And if they will not do it or cannot do it, then the solution is to get rid of them and bring in other people who will. Next. There is Bernie the Chair. This is from January 20th, 2, as well that is, and it's by Jake Johnson. The people are demanding action. Incoming Senate Budget Chair Bernie Sanders lays out visionary first 100 days for Joe Biden. Well, there's Bernie, and he's got on his mittens and his only coat. I have it on good authority that's his only quote. Anyway, with Joe Biden sworn in and Democrats said to officially take control of the U.S. Senate Wednesday afternoon, that was, of course, yesterday afternoon. I don't know that I saw Chuck Schumer taking control as much as I saw him talking urgently with Mitch McConnell. Incoming Budget Committee Chairman Senator Bernie Sanders argued that the majority party must waste no time pushing ahead with an ambitious agenda aimed at confronting the immediate crises of COVID-19, economic calamity, and climate change, and setting the U.S. on a more just and equitable path. The people are demanding action, Bernie said. And quote again, the Times called out for bold action on the part of the Congress for a willingness for us to stand up to powerful special interests who want to maintain the status quo. That's what we got to do, and we got to do it quickly, unquote. I have to remark that in the context of that particular remark, it's very ironic that Biden had the healthcare part of his work plan written by lobbyists, by his lobbyist donors. That's really standing up to powerful special interests, isn't it, Bernie? In an op-ed for The Guardian published Wednesday morning, the Vermont senator argued that with unified control of the federal government, the Democrats have no excuse not to pass within the first 100 days of legislation tackling the ongoing coronavirus pandemic and economic collapse, guaranteeing health care to all, providing a universal paid family and medical leave to workers, and securing a $15 an hour federal minimum wage, on top of other key priorities. Warren Gunnell said, who was Bernie's man with the receipts, said 100-day agenda, boost checks to $2K, $15 an hour minimum wage, emergency, hashtag Medicare for all, double community health centers, lower drug prices, don't tax emergency unemployment benefits, paid family leave, universal child care, rebuild America, combat climate change, tax the rich, save the USPS, and more. That's surely a summary of the agenda. And that was tweeted in response to a CNN opinion tweet quoting Bernie. And Bernie addressed critics who say such a sprawling agenda is impractical, giving existing Senate obstacles such as the filibuster. Sanders said Democrats can utilize the budget reconciliation process, which requires a simple majority instead of the usual 60 votes, to, quote, act quickly and pass this emergency legislation, unquote. Quote again, Bernie, but that is not enough. This year, we must also pass a second reconciliation bill that deals with the major structural changes our country desperately needs. Ultimately, we must confront the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality and create a country that works for all and not just the few. We Americans should no longer be denied basic economic rights that are guaranteed to people in virtually every other major country. I can't really underline that too much, and I don't really understand why Americans haven't taken the trouble to pay attention to what has gone on in other countries for a very long time. What a bunch of suckers we are. These basic rights are guaranteed to people in virtually every other peer country which we trade with and we deal with. They have the basic economic rights. And our elites, our leaders, deny them to us. And instead of us throwing out these leaders en masse, whole, practically universally, in both houses of Congress, we vote the incumbents in again and again and again. The very people denying us these basic economic rights. How can Americans be so stupid as to do that? I know it's forbidden to say these days that our countrymen are stupid. But what else will you call it when they don't know and they can't see that citizens of other countries have all these things and we don't? And if you say that to them, the idiots will say to you, well, why don't you go live in some of these other countries? And the point is, why are you so stupid that you're not getting these things here? There is no reason Joe Biden could not sign into law two major bills that will accomplish most of the goals I listed above within the first 100 days of the new Congress. Well, Bernie, the problem is not that he could not sign into law two major bills. He could sign them into law if they were passed by the new Congress. If they were passed by the new Congress, he probably would. But Bernie, how are you going to get him through the new Congress? Bernie says, quote, we cannot allow Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership to sabotage a legislation that would improve the lives of millions of working Americans and is wildly unpopular. Well, we've allowed that for the last, 30 to 40 years? So why shouldn't we allow it again? I'm not advocating that we do allow it. And Bernie is pleading with us, saying we cannot allow it. I only hope that people will listen to what he says and not allow it. Though I don't know how you could stop them from doing it. I mean, you could penalize them in 2022 by kicking the whole lot of corrupt people out of the Congress. You could do that. But now that you were stupid enough to vote for them in 2020, I'm not sure what you can do at the beginning of 2021 to not allow them to sabotage these laws that people need badly right now. So everybody's excited because Bernie is talking about using budget reconciliation. Hey, Bernie. Hey, Bernie. Hey, Bernie. Hey, Bernie. While reconciliation is wonderful, getting rid of the filibuster is lots better. So when are you going to come out full bore for getting rid of the filibuster, Bernie? I know you want to exercise your newfound power as the head of one of the committees that can start reconciliation bills. We know you want to show us how good you are at doing that. But after all, isn't it better to show us what can be done in getting rid of the filibuster real fast? I think so. I think that would be even better. Next. What about foreign policy? Foreign policy is different. Excuse me. That is to say, the Progressive International. I bet you didn't know there was such a group as the. There is. Calls on Biden to end illegal U.S. sanctions responsible for, quote, untold death and devastation. Not so sure it's untold. but attached their meeting. This was again by Kenny Stansel, January 20th. And Kenny says, a global coalition fighting for more egalitarian, democratic, peaceful, and sustainable societies said on Wednesday that newly sworn-in U.S. President Joe Biden put an end to unilateral, illegal, and deadly economic sanctions on the first day of his presidency. Guess what? He didn't do that. In a statement issued ahead of the inaugural ceremony in Washington, D.C., the International called on the Biden administration to, quote, take urgent action to restore the right of all countries to have sovereign relations with the world, untrammeled by U.S. interference through their sanctions policy, which is in violation of all norms, okay, of international the law. Does anybody see a contradiction there in having norms of law instead of laws? Of course, you can't have laws because laws are passed by governments. And there is no international government. Anyway, they demanded that the Biden administration cease by unilateral and illegal sanctions on day one of his presidency. So while they were doing that, what was Tony Blinken doing? Well, Mr. Blinken was telling the senators in his confirmation hearing he was coming out for sanctions. He was saying the administration is going to continue the sanctions and maybe even increase them towards some countries. But the International explained, quote, U.S.-backed economic sanctions impact nearly 1/3 of humanity in some 30 countries, causing untold death and devastation by denying them access to global markets, restricting the ability to generate wealth, stabilize currency, and provide basic human essentials for their people. And quote again, for the past several decades, the U.S. has used its considerable institutional power over finance and also diplomacy to strangle countries who don't fall in line with its global political and economic agenda. Yes, the United States has been acting like the leader of a global mafia. Absolutely. Cuba is, quote, the most dramatic case, the coalition continued, pointing out that the small island has endured for 6 decades. What have they endured? They've endured a, quote, blockade that the UN General Assembly votes annually to dismantle, unquote. So what do? The General Assembly, the lawmaking body, insofar as there is a lawmaking body, the quasi-lawmaking body of the international community, the General Assembly, votes annually to dismantle the blockades. And what do? We just ignore the blockades. Just ignore them, that's all. We use the General Assembly for what we want to use it for. And if we get approval for something from the General Assembly, we trumpet it all over the world and talk about people who dare to defy the General Assembly. But there's been a blockade for 6 decades that the UN General Assembly votes annually to dismantle, and we just ignore it. In addition, the unilateral sanctions against Iran and Venezuela, quote, have destabilized these countries and have led to a deterioration of health, education, nutrition, and the overall quality of life in both countries. Absolutely true. Rather than lifting or weakening the measures, okay, the U.S. has tightened its sanctions against Iran, okay, and Venezuela, hitting these countries hard with a full-spectrum attack on their medical institutions and their welfare institutions. The coalition noted. Okay, the demand for Biden to lift the sanctions comes one day after Maria Cantwell urged Treasury Secretary-designate Janet Yellen to use sanctions even more aggressively than the Trump administration did, calling them an economic tool without acknowledging how they create the misery and suffering for ordinary people living in countries on the receiving end. And Rania Khalek tweeted, Trump starving millions of people, depriving them of medicine and food and a future, isn't enough for this Democrat. How sadistic. Senator Maria Cantwell, the senator from Microsoft, literally from Microsoft. She used to work for Microsoft in the marketing area. Made a lot of money working for Microsoft in the Washington, in that area. Used some of the money to run for the Senate. Used to be called the best looking lady in the Senate. But I think she's given away that title to some others since that time. Anyway, she says, calls on Yellen to use sanctions aggressively. I do believe in using sanctions. The Trump administration failed to be as aggressive on sanctions. I want to be sure you use that as an economic tool, unquote, she said. And then she probably goes to church on Sunday, right? Although their pleas were ignored, several world leaders in 2020 advocated for terminating warfare of all kinds, including the, quote, economic warfare exemplified by sanctions policy. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said last March that COVID-19 exposed the, quote, folly of war, unquote, and called for a global ceasefire, as Common Dreams reported at that time. In addition, as the Progressive International has noted, a number of UN special rapporteurs and UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, also urged the U.S. to bring its illegal sanctions to an end in 2020. I have to point out that Bachelet has been somewhat ambivalent about human rights when it comes to Bolivia and when it comes to Venezuela. Supporting, at least with respect to Bolivia, the activities of the OAS to try to overturn the election a couple of years ago in Bolivia. And by saying that the election was illegitimate without any evidence, she basically was in support of the coup that occurred in Bolivia at that time that saw the overthrow of the legitimate government that had been reelected there by a considerable margin, the government of Evo Morales. Fortunately, just a few months back, there was another election in Bolivia. The fascists who had taken over bowed to international pressure and had another election, which, miracle of miracles, was honest. And Evo's party was returned as the party that was to rule Bolivia. And Evo came home to very, very large crowds with his party firmly in control of the country after they had an electoral landslide there in 2020. Okay, but anyway, Bachelet has not always been on the right side. Quote, at this crucial time, both for global public health reasons and to support the rights and lives of millions of people in these countries, sectoral sanctions should be eased or suspended, she said last March. In the context of a global pandemic, impeding medical efforts in one country heightens the risk, for all of us. That is just in case, the United States doesn't um, 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 feel sorry for the plight, of the Venezuelans and for all the deaths that we have caused there. But she makes the point that, hey, you're heightening the risk for all of us by having these sanctions, hoping that is going to motivate Tony Blinken. Evidently, it doesn't. Anyway, the International also cited Prime Minister Moses Nagamutu of Guyana, who was quoted, I'm not going to read that quote, only the last sentence, who therefore call upon the international community to adopt urgent and effective measures to eliminate the use of unilateral coercive economic measures against developing countries. Instead of repeating former Donald Trump's refusal to lift the U.S. sanctions, even amid a devastating pandemic that has killed more than 2 million people globally, the International is urging Biden to, quote, to heed these calls, unquote, from around the world, to recognize the lethal effects of economic sanctions and stop imposing them unilaterally in violation, of international law. And that gets us to the following post. By Brett Wilkins of Common Dreams, quote, pure sadism. Biden blasted for continuing Trump's by recognition of the Guaido coup regime and deadly sanctions in Venezuela. And yes, that is what's been going on in Venezuela. And you have someone there holding up a sign in Venezuela. We don't want to be an American colony. We want to be a free country. They were rallying at a protest in London on January 28th of 2019. And that's a picture. And in perpetuation of Trump administration policy and nearly 2 centuries of U.S. imperialism in Latin America, I think it's more than 2 centuries of U.S. imperialism in Latin America, isn't it? Antony Blinken, President Joe Biden's nominee Secretary of State, told senators Tuesday that the United States will continue to recognize the coup leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela. Reuters reports Blinken told senators during his confirmation hearing that Venezuela needs an effective policy that can restore democracy to the nation of 28 million people. And Nick Estes tweets, regime change with the most diverse cabinet in history. Quote, Biden would seek to more effectively target sanctions on Venezuela, which aim to oust the president, Nicolas Maduro. And that's a picture of Juan Guaido there. And supposedly, Reuters reports Biden will recognize Guaido as Venezuela's leader. Although Venezuelan President Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has alienated allies and adversaries alike with his government's numerous and serious human rights violations. He was democratically elected in 2013 and re-elected in 2018. And I have to say here, there may be some human rights violations, but hey, we have human rights violations all the time in this country, and we support the murder of people, approaching a genocide, in Yemen. When our allies, the Saudis, want to do it, we support that. We're implicated in the human rights violations over there. But in spite of his numerous and serious human rights violations, I'm here to tell you, Maduro is not exactly Hitler. He's not even as bad as the Saudi rulers. He's not as bad as many nations that we are pleased to support. He's not as bad as the Colombia human rights violations, for example, where they go around murdering labor union leaders. He's not as bad as the human rights violations that took place in Bolivia after the coup that we supported there. He's not as bad as the human rights violations we've supported over many, many years in many countries. All manner of observers had said that their elections are free and fair, both the ones in 2013 and the ones in 2018. Got a clean bill of health from international observers, including Americans. Do our elections get a clean bill of health here? Blinken also told the senators that the Biden administration would seek to more effectively target Venezuela with economic sanctions, which have been described as a form of economic terrorism. And Rania Khalek tweets, and she's telling the truth here as far as we know it, Biden nominee Secretary of State Antony Blinken tells Marco Rubio he agrees with Trump's starvation, medicine-denying sanctions on Venezuela, which killed 40,000 people in a year there. Yes, that's been known for the last 2 years at least. Killed 40,000 people in a nation of 28 million. How large is that nation compared to the United States? 1/12 the size of the United States? Off the top of my head, roughly 1/12 the size of the United States. Correct me if on my math if I'm wrong about that. If it is 1/12, multiply 40,000 times 12. Then you'll see how serious this is. 40,000 people in 1 year in Venezuela is the equivalent of 480,000 people in the United States if we were subjected to such a blockade that was lethal on the same scale as what we've subjected them to. We would have lost 480,000 people. Now, as of today, we've lost more than 415,000 to the coronavirus. But we haven't lost that 480,000 yet. But that's how serious it would have been if we were subjected to such an action. I know We can't be subjected to such an action because we sit on top of the world. From a moral point of view, that's no reason for us to subject the people of other nations to such an action. That is not an action that impacts the person we view as a dictator and that we do not like there. That impacts his people on the theory that we can force them to displace him because they'll get tired of dying for their country. We ought to know by now that doesn't work. How many Germans chose to die for their country in World War II before they gave up? There was millions. 40,000 is not enough to bring the Venezuelans to heel. 200,000 is not enough to bring them to heel. 500,000 is not enough to bring them to heel. We need to get the hell out of there. It's not our country, even if our corporations want it. We need to get the hell out of there. And Tony Blinken should be ashamed of himself. He should immediately resign. Sanctions are largely responsible for the crippling of Venezuela's once thriving economy, and of course the tremendous suffering. I don't know if that's true, if it's largely responsible. Partly responsible, certainly, but a big part of the crippling of their economy has been the fall in the price of oil, which, by the way, we and the Saudis had a lot to do with also. They wanted cheaper prices for our people, and the Saudis wanted to drive a lot of competitive forces out of business. So they made sure the bottom fell out. The bottom fell out of the oil price market, and Venezuela was impacted very heavily by that. So much of their foreign exchange came from oil that their economy was severely impacted by that. So it wasn't just our sanctions that did it. It was also in part our foreign policy and our collaboration with the Saudis that did it. Anyway, this has caused a tremendous suffering from the poor and working class people whose dramatic uplift was once hailed as the great success of the Bolivarian revolution launched under the late President Hugo Chavez, who, by the way, we also tried to kick out because we didn't like him. Now many people give him credit for having great success there. But we have to remember that the revolution there is being continued by Maduro, that the same political forces that supported Chavez are now supporting Maduro, and the same ground level democratic organizations, the community organizations that supported Chavez, are now supporting Maduro even more strongly. And the same civilian military forces that are supporting Chavez are now in back of the Maduro regime. According to a 2019 report from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, a progressive think tank based in Washington, D.C., as many as 40,000 Venezuelans have died due to sanctions, which have made it much more difficult for everyday people to obtain food, medicine, and other necessities. And Medea Benjamin tweets, creepy Senator at Marco Rubio forced Antony Blinken, actually it's Antony Blinken, but that's okay, at his confirmation hearing to say that Biden admin would continue Trump's failed Venezuela policy of recognizing fake President, quote unquote, Guaido, and not by negotiating with Maduro. How about a good neighbor policy on non-interference? How about it indeed? Common Dreams are reported Wednesday, the global left-wing activist group, Progressive International, called on the Biden administration to end sanctions on countries including Cuba, Iran, and Venezuela, which the group said are targeted because, quote, they don't fall in line with Washington's global economic and political agenda. Anyway, Blinken's comments to senators are one of a series of recent signs that the U.S., which has been supporting coups and dictators in Venezuela for over a century, would stay the imperial course under Joe Biden. During the contentious and sometimes calamitous transition between administrations, the Republicans and Democrats alike took comfort in a policy meeting between Elliott Abrams, the noted war criminal, former President Donald Trump's special representative for Venezuelan affairs. Yeah, the guy in charge of the attempted coup, the one that failed, and members of the Biden transition team. Guaido was just the figurehead. It was Abrams who was in charge of putting together the coup. And for once, he got nowhere. One of the most famous activities of Juan Guaido. Oh, by the way, Carlos Vecchio, who was Guaido's ambassador to the United States and who was feted by the Trump administration, was Biden's inaugural guest on Wednesday. Carlos Vecchio was responsible for leading his own assault on his home country's democracy, Bavent Solidarity tweeted, and is currently wanted in Venezuela for inciting a violent attack on the Attorney General's office in Caracas. And there is Carlos Vecchio with Donald Trump. He was one of the masterminds of the Guaido coup, the Guaido attempted coup. He was charged in Caracas with public incitement, property damage, arson, and conspiracy for an attack on the Venezuelan Attorney General's office. His appearance at the U.S. Capitol 2 weeks after Biden condemned the deadly Trump-inspired mob attack on the building did not go unnoticed. Vecchio's presence at the presidential swearing-in ceremony was filled with irony, wrote a journalist Anya Parampil. Quote, in the days following the Capitol riot, Biden and his allies have denounced the violent takeover of Congress as an assault on democracy, with the incoming president himself declaring the rioters to be domestic terrorists. Yet, she added, Carlos Vecchio, the Guaido ally, with a fresh ticket to Biden's inauguration, is responsible for leading his own assault on his home country's democracy. But not only that, folks, I'll stop sharing this for just a minute. If I can retrieve something else for just a second here. Please be patient. I'll see if I can find this reasonably quickly. I don't know why I can't. close to having it now. There's one item I'm trying to pick up here. Okay, so I'm failing to pick it up, but there's one article from Common Dreams which appeared not too long ago, okay, which I'm trying to find unsuccessfully, unfortunately. Okay. But anyway, what the article shows is a picture of Juan Guaido trying to hurtle a fence in Caracas but to attack the Venezuelan Congress. In other words, he and some Confederates were launching an attack on the Capitol. Of course, he only had a few people with him. It wasn't like the assault on the Capitol that we saw here in the United States. That did not happen. In other words, it wasn't a very large assault at all. It was just a few people. He was easily stopped, actually, by the authorities. And by the way, he wasn't put in jail. Hasn't been put in jail, okay, in Venezuela when he was there last. The reason being that the brutal dictator Nicolas Maduro didn't want to make a martyr out of him. So he basically let him go. So he came to the United States. So there we are. So that's the news for today. What does the news have to say? What does it herald? It heralds a Biden administration that still plans on continuing the corruption from the donors and continuing the corrupt foreign policy, which in Latin America is being pursued for the benefit of Americans, corporations, not for the benefit of democracy. Certainly, the Bolivian coup was propelled by the desire of our corporations to get their hands on the lithium deposits in Bolivia. They wanted to get their hands on those, and the Morales regime was blocking them. Raw materials, imperialists wanting the raw materials, okay, of another countries, didn't want to just buy the stuff from that country because the people in Venezuela wanted to charge them too high a price. So, not being willing to pay that price, they were supporting a military coup, right? Imperialism, classic imperialism. American companies want to get their hands on Venezuelan oil at good prices. So how do they do that? Support a coup. Throw out the leader that the Venezuelans believe is governing for their benefit. trying to make them an independent country that they can be proud of. And we're planning a coup against him. In every other country along the rim of the Andes, we're playing politics in such a way to block the popular forces, which every once in a while emerge and take control. A pink tide, and we block the pink tide for the sake of our corporations. And the Biden administration evidently plans to continue that kind of foreign policy. That's what we got. Biden plans to continue also having lobbyists write the legislation that he favors. Corruption. It's naked corruption. The Biden administration doesn't seem to want to reform that. It seems to want to continue it. Anyway, to your comments. Dia Swift says, AOC skipped the elitist crap and went to a produce workers protest. She rocks this time anyway. Yep. She rocks a lot of the time. Evelina says, is he full of baloney or what? Steve Gonzo says, malarkey. Yeah. Dia says, I just realized I have Batoon unicorns on my tights. How cool. I thought they were ponies. Give us our ponies, Biden. Dia says, that nutty green QAnon Georgia senator filed to impeach Biden. She's not a senator. She's a representative. But go ahead on, girl. Finish tearing the GOP to shreds. Dia says, remember that today was the first COVID case reported in Washington State. That is 1 year ago today. The first COVID case. How many cases we got now here? 3 million? Jeez. Got to be more than 3 million. Must be about 8 million, something like that. Steve says, cannonball. Cannonball. And Lana says, hola, I just got off the Medicare for All call. Well, was it good, Lana? Dia says, very cool, Lana. Evelina says, Happy New Year. Okay, and Dia says, is Jayapal out of the hospital? Or did she just not go in? That's good. If she can just ride COVID out at home. I don't know if she went into the hospital or not, Dia. Probably we can tell by checking in at her Twitter account. There's probably some mention of what was going on. Dia says, did Rashida really call Cruz a dumbass because of his comments on the Paris Agreement? That sounds like our Rashida. Steve Gonzo says, Happy New Year. Get out of my head. That's what I wanted to say. Weird. I usually say it all month through my BDD. Through your BDD? Today, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene introduced articles of impeachment against President Joe Biden for his corrupt actions involving his quid pro in Ukraine and his abuse of power by allowing his son, Hunter Biden, to siphon off cash from America's greatest enemies, Russia and China. Lana says she was tweeting earlier. My guess is she is home, tested positive, but not sure of symptoms. Lana said, I didn't see that about Rashida, but it wouldn't surprise me, and he deserves it. He deserves a lot more than that. Dia says, thank you for the update. And Rahul Majumdar says, here in Canada, our head of state resigned. Okay, is Bernie available? Your head of state, okay, the official head of state is still a governor general, right? Rahul Majumdar, it's a formal head of state, if I'm not mistaken. Kay says, I hope he isn't, Rahul. Well, we need him here. And Rahul says, a recent COVID-19 recovery in Medicare 60 to 64 is about all you can expect from Biden, in my humble opinion. I think Bernie is trying to push him to extend Medicare to people 50 and over. But we'll see. And Kay says, yes, I'm afraid of that too, Rahul. And Steve says, and by cannonball, I mean shots chased by hits, chased by shots, CBHTS, and so on. I'm afraid I don't know what that means. But anyway, Dia Swift said, because of American exceptionalism, they don't care about the rest of the world, although they have it right. That's what conceitedness gets you. Dia Swift said, yet, Senator McConnell has his hooks deep in the sabotaging of we the people. Where has Bernie been? He's been there. He knows what's going on. But, of course, he doesn't talk to Mitch McConnell at all. McConnell talks to Schumer. Now, Bernie talks to Schumer. And Bernie knows Schumer a long time. I think they went to the same high school. I think Howie Klein went to that high school too. So I think that Bernie talks in one ear of Schumer's and McConnell talks in the other ear, and I think that's the way it works. But why should Schumer be talking to McConnell? What does he want to get from him? What can McConnell give him that he needs? I don't think there's anything McConnell would be willing to give to Schumer that Schumer needs. What Schumer needs is to get rid of the filibuster. He has to take that away from Mitch McConnell. Steve says Portland activists trashed the JBHQ. There goes the Antifa Dems connection. Oh, the Joe Biden headquarters. There goes the Antifa Dems connection. And Lana says, sorry I am not chatting more here. I am still working. That's okay, Lana. Steve Gonzo says, foreign policy in a nutshell, we're terrorists. We are. We may be the world's worst terrorists. Evelyn says, isn't Blinken one of Santa's reindeer? Yeah, wink and blinken and nod. How about wink and blinken and nod? Okay, Dia Swift said, Biden is keeping Wray as FBI director. Steve Gonzo says, Alt Blinken. Evelina says, the reparations for 60 years of blockade instead of an embargo on the island nation, just staying in Guantanamo way past treaty expiration is intolerable enough. It is. It's a violation of international law. And Rahul Majumdar says, Senator Cantwell demonstrates how Trump alone was not the problem. She does. And so many other Democrats do too, especially when it comes to foreign policy. Kay says, tax breaks and austerity have been the problem under both parties in the United States. That, but also foreign policy has been the problem under both parties in the United States. And Evelina says, Bachelet was oblivious to what was going on in her own country, Chile. Okay, imagine that. Even after she herself was a victim of torture by the Chilean government. And Dia Swift says, wow, Congress totally dismissed the National Guard to parking garage conditions and only one bathroom, an electrical outlet. Don't they know that they may just need them again? Yeah, I mean, they must know it. I don't understand that. okay, at all. That's ridiculous. They're nuts. Steve Gunzo says, dude, they're everywhere, pervasive, systematic, worldwide. Evelyn said, is there international law or are they just norms? They're norms. There are no international laws because there isn't really an international government. Dia says, Schmancy says, House Dems will be completely ready to pass Biden's stimulus first week of February. And she says, it better be $2,000 at least, says Dia. If they don't pass 2,000, they're stupid. Stupid. If Biden doesn't sign the 2,000 and support the 2,000, he is stupid. He was already stupid to interpret everything down to $1,400. He looks like a real schmuck for doing that. And he not only looks like someone who is needlessly cruel, he not only looks like somebody who is needlessly technical by knocking it down to $1,400, but he looks like somebody who is needlessly stupid because people really want that $2,000. And if he had given it to them without hesitation, just straight up, and hammered the Republicans for the 2,000 and the conservative Dems for the 2,000, he would have been a hero to people. So why not be a hero to people? Don't you want them to vote for your party in 2022? Don't you want them to vote for you again if you decide to serve past 2024? How can someone say he's a good politician or view himself as a good politician and do something so stupid? Steve says laws are meant for us. Raul says most countries follow them. There are exceptions, though. Yeah, like the U.S. Evelina says, gee, thanks, Reuters. Which human rights violations? And Raul says, do Americans know that capitalists control 80% of Venezuela's economy? Well, I didn't know that, Rahul, but I know this. Okay, I know that that government controls more than 80%, controls more than 20%, of our economy. I'm not sure what the figure is now, but between the federal government and the state government, I'll bet it's 25%. So I'll bet that capitalists control only 75%, of our economy. And that's if you include the nonprofit sector. Evelina says, not as bad as Central American leaders either, or the Ecuadorian Lenin Moreno. Yeah, Lenin Moreno should go change his name, his first name. He should change it to Hitler Moreno. So Dia Swift says, Scottish Green Party demands urgent investigation to keep Trump's toxic brand out of Scotland. Well, gee, I thought his toxic brand was already in Scotland. Doesn't he have a golf course there somewhere? He has a golf course somewhere in the British Isles, doesn't he? Steve Gunson says, how long till war casualties got censored again? I don't know. Steve Gonzo says, oh, well, we're going back to Iraq. Are we going back to Iraq? In what numbers? Evelina says, not as bad as the Honduran or Guatemalan leaders or Ecuadorian Lenin Moreno. Not as bad as most, which is not bad at all. I'll laugh out loud. Yeah, I know. I don't know if there are many regimes in Latin America right now that are actually better for the people of their countries. I suppose the current leadership in Argentina is better. I'm not sure Chile is better. I'm sure that the people, okay, in Uruguay, okay, are better. But you're talking about a handful of regimes in Latin America that are better. Most probably Venezuela is in the top 10% rather than the bottom 10%. And Rahul says, the money party, two corporate wings serving the kleptocracy, of course. Evelina says, yep, Dr. Joe, the Saudis. Evelina says, not Chavez, but rather Chavez. Thank you, Evelina. Dr. Joe. She says, Dr. Joe. And Kay says, we need to watch out for our own and keep out of other countries' biz. You're right, Kay. We do. And Raul says, by Yemen, another human-generated famine for military profit. Evelyn says, by Nicaragua is also being harassed. Yes, Nicaragua is too democratic these days. Oh, by the way, how has Costa Rica gotten away with being democratic for all these years? Does anybody know? They've been democratic since as long as I was in graduate school back in the 1960s. And they've gotten away with it. How come the United States has left them alone? That's kind of a mystery. I'm not sufficiently informed about what's going on down there. I was in the 1960s, but I'm no longer around.
Don't give them any ideas.
Yeah, Barney says, don't give them any ideas. Steve Gonzo says, USA Today, President Joe Biden, Oval Office charges Cesar Chavez changes Cesar Chavez bust. He changed the Chavez bust. What did he do to the bust? Everybody is tweeting about, linking to the article about the bust. Evelina says, read that Churchill's bust was also removed, but know anything about it? Steve says, Chavez, Biden, Oval Office, I think. Okay, I just got censored twice. Okay, says Churchill sucked, but very badly. Terrible tyrant, many Brits say. Evelina Pont. Kay says exactly. And Evelina has question marks. Steve Gonzo says, looters. And Rahul Majumdar says, but yes, Bolivia is back in socialist control. I know. And that's a good thing for that country. It has been a very good thing for the indigenous people there, who are the majority in Bolivia. Evelina says, Steve Gonzo, really? Steve Gonzo says, looters got to loot after a violent insurrection. Am I right? At White House quote tweet, Howard Mortman, at Howard Mortman, January 14th, Abraham Lincoln bust in the White House, 2:09 p.m. Yeah, that's Trump. I think that he looted a Lincoln bust from the White House. Evelina says, thanks, Dr. Joe, for your Latin American analysis commentary. Sure. Steve Gonzo said, 25,196,086 cases confirmed. Thank you, Steve. And 420,285 dead. Okay, is that according to my favorite site, via the Worldometer site? COVID-19 numbers for the U.S. today: 24.6 million cases, 409,997. Okay, as of today. That definitely leads me to if I could find quickly my frickin' favorite site here, excuse me. Unnecessary cursing. Yeah, kind of.
You don't know how to swear anymore.
Yeah, Bonnie says I don't know how to swear anymore. So, today's fatalities 4,363, 420,200 K&85. Total cases 25,196,000 K&86. Deaths per million now up to 1,266 per million here in the United States. $13.89, okay, in the UK as of the end of today. Versus 12.66. 126, actually 123 behind where the UK is. So back to your comments. Yep, Steve Gonzo was quoting from the Worldometer site. And the Governor General, okay, is Julie Payette. And she now is not there. Even when he says, can you explain Canada's parliamentary system isn't Trudeau, a top guy there? He is, but he's the prime minister. Steve Gonzo said, Bill Murray, Caddyshack, Cannonball. Oh, thank you, Steve Gonzo. Dia Swift says, laugh out loud, looking at a meme with Bernie in mittens, sitting in the passenger seat of the Blanco Bronco. O.J. Simpson's slow-speed chase back in the days. Dia Swift says Bronco. The white Bronco, yeah. And Rahul Machandra says, Canada's a constitutional monarchy. Queen Elizabeth is the ceremonial head of state, and Governor General is the official and symbolic head of state with ceremonial powers. The representative of Queen Elizabeth in government. The Prime Minister is the head of government, responsible for policy decisions, cabinet appointments, subject to the confidence of the House, okay, of Parliament. Okay, there's only one House, okay, in Canada, right? But technically speaking, isn't the House of Lords the House of Lords for Canada too? Or does Canada have its own House of Lords? I don't think Canada has its own House of Lords, does it? And Rahul Majumdar, Trudeau is the PM then, right? Yes, he is the PM. And Steve says, true, duh. And Rahul sounds super handsome and even smarter, says Dia. And Rahul, I meant, which is R-A-H-U-L, spelled correctly by Dia. Evelina says, Costa Rica has no army. That's true, but it has a civil guard, right? And Steve says, and by duh, I mean dough. Oh, dough. Thank you, Steve. That's Steve Gonzo. Evelina Ponte says, love it, Steve. Laugh out loud. And Dia Swift said, Biden took Cesar Chavez bronze bust in the Oval Office for all to see. Oh, cool. And Steve Gonzo says, "Shut up, I'm drunk." Evelyn says, "Likely excuse, laugh out loud." Dia says, "Why didn't Trump loot Confederate Klan portraits and busts from the White House instead?" Um, uh, uh, I guess Lincoln wasn't all that, and a bag of chips either. Well, obviously he looted the bust of Lincoln because he might have thought that was worth some money. He probably didn't think that the Confederate general, uh, the Klan portraits, were worth anything, maybe. Evelyn says, "Seems pretty lucid to me." Kay says, "I doubt we'll ever be over this pandemic." So a couple of doctors today saying they don't know whether the vaccines will be effective against those. Well, according to Fauci, he was on today on behalf of the Biden administration, and he said he thinks the vaccines are going to be effective. And he expects them to mutate very frequently. He says that kind of virus mutates. But he says, generally speaking, the vaccines are likely to be effective, but they're going to have to track the mutations, and they're going to have to determine whether they are effective or not, take action if they're not. Steve Gonzo says, over 25,000 people dead in Florida, record numbers of infections, and a disastrous vaccine rollout, and DeSantis. And Steve Gonzo points to an article from the Miami CBS Local.com. Fired Florida data scientist Rebecca Jones turning herself in after an arrest warrant is issued. Yes, she turned herself in. She thinks she's going to get off. Her lawyer is expressing great confidence. And Carmen Muniz has been keeping me apprised of what is going on there. She has not been available here, I guess, due to phone difficulties and also due to Facebook putting her in jail for a whole month, I guess. I think 20 days is still left in her FB jail sentence. And Rahul says, House of Commons and Senate are separate houses, bicameral government. Prime Minister K is the leader of the party with the most seats in the House of Commons. Thank you, Rahul. I'd forgotten that. And he says, of course, Joe, you're right. Robber Baron's going to rob. Kay says, he thinks is not good info, in my opinion. Okay, he thinks. I think we're at the end of the comment stream, folks. So I think it's my time to say goodnight. And Dia Swift says, Rebecca has COVID too. She was diagnosed when she turned herself in. Yes, I read that. I've read that. So she might not be going to jail for a while. I don't know if she'll be going to jail anyway, under the circumstances. Anyway, I think it's time to say goodnight. So thank you for coming. Thank you for staying around. And thank you for the conversation. I will probably have some short takes tomorrow. I will certainly try to get in a few of them, okay, in any case. If not tomorrow, then on Saturday. And I'll certainly see you for the in-depth show on Saturday night. I don't know what the problem was last night. My system has been perfectly fine here today and is still fine. My CPU burden tonight is very reasonable. It's in the 30s, okay, low 40s. My physical memory is only 32. In other words, my system is not being taxed at all, as far as I can tell, in spite of all the articles I went through. So I don't know what the problem was last night. I also didn't have any problem for the short takes today as well. So it seems to have been a local problem last night. I have the hunch that somehow the fact that I was on a Zoom call before the live stream somehow affected it, but I don't know why that Zoom call should affect it, because on Tuesday I was on a Zoom call and then I went into my live stream. I didn't have any problem on Tuesday. So I'm baffled by what caused the problem. Anyway, I will continue to try to track it down. Here tonight, there was no problem. Everything was normal.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Oh, Bonnie is wishing you a good night. Hope you heard her. Dia Swift says, got me another dose. I'm a junkie for your stuff, Joe. Thank you, Dia. Dia says it was censorship because of the inauguration. Facebook always does that. Oh, God. Facebook. I'd love to get rid of Facebook and have some place else to go to. Anyway, good night again.